Welcome everyone to Nerd of the Rings. Today we are talking about The War of the Rohirrim. The film, which was announced in 2021, is now hitting movie theaters, and this is the first time I've covered a new film here on the channel. So my plan is to have this be a non-spoiler review, with a full-on spoiler review later on where we can get into all the nitty-gritty on how this adapts and expands upon the story from the books. But for now, I want to give some general thoughts on the different characters and elements of the film point by point. Let's get things started with the character that I, and probably most Tolkien fans, are looking forward to seeing in action, Helm Hammerhand. Saying it as simply as possible, Helm is totally BA. The dude is a mountain of a man, and his fight and battle scenes are a real highlight. Him taking out his vengeance on the Dunlendings at the Hornburg is introduced from his enemy's perspective, and it's very effective. Combined with his last stand, I think these will be the favorite moments of the film for book fans. They're definitely the standout moments for me. There is a specific time late in the film where I would have liked to see a bit more of Helm's mental state and see him wrestle with what has occurred, but I'll get to that in my spoiler review. Hera is much what I expected from the character. She is our eyes into the world. The losses and the mystery of this story are hers to experience, which I think is effective. For all the hand-wringing that went on over Hera replacing Helm in this story, I don't think that's the case at all. Helm does all the awesome things we would expect from him, and Hera provides a lens through which we witness the actions. She's set up well as the daughter of a great warrior king who is clearly close with her brothers and cousin. What transpires with each of these characters hits harder for the audience because of how it affects Hera. Again, no spoilers here, but when the time finally comes for Hera to wield a sword herself, it feels earned. Personally, my concern when it came to Hera being the main character was more with how Freyalaf would be treated. He does almost all the things from the book tale, with one notable exception that I'll really have to hold on to for that spoiler review. Freyalaf is a character that I liked in this film, but I definitely would have liked seeing more of him. I do like that this important figure is clearly the wisest person in the room when it comes to the pending war, and the circumstances around his retreat to Dunharrow are an inspired expansion on the story, though I think it would have been good to resolve this in a more overt way in the conclusion. Again, more on this later. In a perfect world, I think we would have gotten more with Freyalaf, Hera, Hama, and Haleth prior to everything hitting the fan. Things in the film escalate very quickly. This is great for getting into some of the most striking set pieces, though I think I would have enjoyed getting more pre-war from the royal family as well as Wolf. Speaking of the main antagonist of the film, I like his depiction here. For the people who tend to think Tolkien is too simplistic in morality, Wolf is one of the many examples to the contrary, and I think the time spent on the character is not wasted here. If we look at the story from this character's perspective in the books, as we often do here on the channel, we find a young man who travels with his father to give a marriage proposal in Edoras. After discourteous words between his father and the king, his father is forced to walk outside without any of his men nearby and is killed by the king. Whether he meant to or not, Helm kills his father, and Wolf is not wholly unjustified in seeking recompense. As with most of the young characters, I do think Wolf would have been well served to get more backstory prior to the inciting incident of the punch. Feeling wronged at the death of a father is certainly understandable, but we don't really get a sense for what that relationship is like. The film strikes a good balance with Wolf. While his actions and his path are understandable, that only goes so far. In the end, his actions show he is the villain, and he's portrayed as such. Getting into some of the dynamics between Rohan, Gondor, and Dunlin in this film was a nice surprise as well. Again, no spoilers, but the way some see Gondor as allies and others as usurpers touches on a much deeper lore conversation without getting bogged down by trying to recount the entire history in the film itself. Now, I always have and always will be upfront with you guys when it comes to my reviews. As I've said before, I'm a huge Tolkien fan who enjoys film, not a film critic. So my perspectives are just that, the view of a Tolkien fan. Likewise, I'm gonna own the fact that I am not an anime guy. I've really only caught bits while my kids are watching like Avatar or Pokemon. So honestly, I don't feel qualified to weigh in on how this stacks up as an anime film, and I'll leave that for other folks to chime in on. I will say I think the fact that this is anime will probably be a barrier for some folks. I get that anime and animation won't be everyone's cup of tea, but the number of people who write off anything animated is pretty disheartening. There's some truly great storytelling in animation both now and historically. And while I'm definitely someone who prefers live action, I would caution against writing off Rohirrim, or any film for that matter, just because it's animated. After about 5 or 10 minutes, being in a different format didn't matter much to me. It felt like Middle-earth. I may not be able to speak into the anime element, but I will say, as far as animated films in general, I've personally never watched one with sound design of this quality. The sound design was done by the folks who worked on the films, and you can tell. Between the incredible sound design and the familiar but expanded music score, this film definitely sounds like the Middle-earth films of old. One thing that'll inevitably be part of analyzing any Middle-earth adaptation for the foreseeable future is callbacks and references to the Peter Jackson films. Here there are some callbacks, most of which I feel work and are justified. A couple that I personally would have left out, but I don't think any of them were eye-roll inducing. And one of them, I'm pretty sure people will say I'm nitpicking, but we'll get to those in my spoiler review. Okay, so the big question with all of these thoughts out there, is the film any good? In my opinion, yes. This is a solidly good film. I hope to see a Helm Hammerhand who is BA, and we get that. And I think Hera largely works as our eyes into this particular Middle-earth conflict. Unlike the 2 seasons we've gotten of Rings of Power thus far, there's a refreshing lack of moments and adaptational choices that made me stop and think, what on earth were you thinking? There's a level of Tolkien storytelling competency in this film that feels like a solid building block toward the future, and actually gives me confidence and not just optimism looking toward Hunt for Gollum. And I've already seen reviews, there's outlets who seem to just be jaded by franchises at this point, and will say this is nothing but milking of the IP, but I honestly just don't see it in this project. This is a good film covering a smaller story in Tolkien's writings. A story that the filmmakers clearly have an understanding and an appreciation for. This is a quality addition to the collection of Middle-earth adaptations since that original 1977 animated Hobbit. And Rohirrim is better than the vast majority of them. Another thing that may not seem as important as it is, nothing War of the Rohirrim does diminishes any characters or events from the previous films. We've seen many prequels, sequels, and sidequels over the decades do things that cast the original work in a different light. And more often than not, it's for the worse. The fact that Rohirrim exists on its own, adds to without detracting from the cinematic world of Middle-earth, is no small feat. Like I said, I'll be watching it again this week, so my overall ranking of War of the Rohirrim may shift on repeat viewing, but for me, this lands at a solid 8 out of 10. As far as placing it among other Middle-earth adaptations, it's in the vicinity of An Unexpected Journey, my 4th favorite Middle-earth screen adaptation of all time. I'm sure movie pundits will have thoughts on how this film appeals toward general audiences, but I honestly can't speak to that. As a Tolkien fan who wanted to see Helm Hammerhand be a total badass, the tragedy from the Dunlending invasion, the sorrow and eeriness of the long winter siege on the Hornburg, and a Rohirrim story that echoes those Tolkien and Anglo-Saxon themes of bravery in the face of tragedy and death, I thoroughly enjoyed this film because it delivers all of these things. I'll be taking my kids to see the film later this week, and I'm excited to watch this film yet again while eating out of a popcorn bucket that looks like a warhammer. While I have my criticisms, my general advice is don't sleep on War of the Rohirrim. We've waited far too long for a Middle-earth adaptation to bring the goods as well as this does. I'm looking forward to dissecting the film with you all in the future, looking at the lore references, and hearing what you guys think as you get a chance to watch it. For now, let me know in the comments if you plan to go see it this weekend, and if you'll be picking up the massive hammer popcorn bucket. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.